It became known to the Soviet command that Hitler's Wehrmacht intended in the summer of 1943 to carry out a major offensive in the area of the Kursk Bulge, expecting after the defeat at Stalingrad to seize the strategic initiative and change the future course of the war in its favor. The Nazi headquarters of the land forces night and day developed a plan for this operation, which was, as we learned after the war, codenamed Citadel. Today you begin a great offensive battle, which can have a decisive influence on the outcome of the war, as a whole said Hitler in his address to the troops on July 4, 1943. The mighty blow that will strike the Soviet armies this morning must shake them to their foundations, and you must know that everything may depend on the outcome of this battle. To implement Operation Citadel, up to 50 selected divisions were concentrated, including 16 tank and motorized divisions, the 4th Tank Army, and a number of other units. The actions of ground forces were to be supported from the air by 2,000 fighters and bombers. It was also envisaged to widely use new combat equipment tanks Tiger and Panther, assault guns Ferdinand, new types of aircraft fighters Focke-Wulf 190A, attack aircraft Heinkel 129. Stavka of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief adopted a strategic plan, during the implementation of which our troops were to bleed the offensive of the Nazi troops' deliberate, deep, powerful defense, and then, during the counter-offensive, to crush the groupings of German troops on the Kursk Bulge. But before I tell about the participation of our regiment in the Battle of Kursk, I want to tell readers the story of a love story of two of my fellow soldiers, people of interesting fate. The readers of the book are already familiar with the heroine of this story. She was a sanitary worker, then a sanitary instructor, and after the Battle of Stalingrad, Maria Petrovna Kukharskaya, the commander of the sanitary platoon. She voluntarily came to the front in 1941 as a 17-year-old girl, and therefore everyone called her simply Masha, Marika, Marusia. She was born in Odessa region. Before the war, she finished 10 grades of secondary school at the station Slobodka of Kodim district. For a year, she served in a reconnaissance company of the 343rd Rifle Division, and from the fall of 1942 until the end of the Great Patriotic War in our regiment. I met her for the first time in November 1941 in the battles near Rostov-on-Don, when we took the village of Nizhny Nylovskaya. Even then, she was known to the whole division. At Stalingrad, our Marika became famous for the whole Don front. Approximately for 3 months, she took out from the battlefield more than 400 wounded. This is, in fact, a full-blooded rifle battalion. And it is quite possible that the number of soldiers, officers, sergeants saved by her in that battle on the Volga would have reached 500,000, if she herself had not lain in the hospital for almost 2 months after a severe wound in the legs. Maria Kukharskaya was repeatedly written about in division, army and frontline newspapers. Songs were composed about her, and the verses for one of them were written by the famous Soviet poet Evgeny Dolmatovsky, who worked then as a correspondent of the Don Front newspaper Red Army during the Battle of Stalingrad. The poet recalls, I, on the assignment of the political department, wrote several songs on already known melodies. It was the only right way. There were no composers at that time at our front. The songs were printed in the newspaper under the heading on a familiar motive. For example, I composed a song about Marusia Kukharskaya, a San instructor who was awarded the Order of Lenin, on the famous motif, if a friend was wounded. This song was published in the newspaper of the Don Front Red Army at the end of October 1942, when Maria was lying in the hospital. And I learned this story from a letter to me from Maria Petrovna Kukharskaya, which she sent almost 40 years after the victory in 1983. Here is what she wrote. I remember on December 5th, in the ward where I was lying, the older sister comes in and says, Maria, today in the hospital concert in honor of Constitution Day. Get ready, let's go. You know I won't make it, I said. My legs still hurt a lot. It's okay. Now, 2 young men will come and carry you. And indeed, 2 convalescent guys came, took me in their arms and carried me right to the front row of the improvised hospital club. The same older sister rises on the hitch, declares the holiday concert open and says, and now a song to the tune of If a Friend Was Wounded will be performed. Poems by Yevgeny Dolmatovsky. This song is dedicated to the San instructor Maria Kukharskaya, whom you all know, and points at me. Everyone applauded, and I was ready to fall through the floor. I did something, bowed to people. A girl nurse sang a song accompanied by a harmonica. Of course, I didn't remember the words that night, and then this girl brought them to me in the ward. Maria Petrovna wrote in her letter only one verse of the song, which I bring here, of course, not for the sake of creating additional fame for Evgeny Dolmatovsky and Maria Kukarskaya, but so that you, readers, could once again join the front poetry, which warmed us in the harsh everyday life of the war. So one verse with a refrain. The fatherland will never forget. The deeds of a combat nurse. How we went into the attack with her. How 400 lives. Marusia saved 400 lives in battle, with bandages and absorbent cotton, with her automatic weapon. Through bullets, bursts and fire, without hunching over, without cowardice, Marusia goes out. A brave sanitation fighter. So this same Marusia, after discharge from the hospital, met a young political officer, Nikolai Smirnov, who arrived in our regiment in October 1942 after 6-month courses at the military political school, which was then in Shuya, Ivanovo region. Smirnov was appointed deputy commander of a machine gun company on the political part in the 1st Rifle Battalion, fought bravely, was awarded the Order of the Red Star, promoted in rank, and during the recertification of political workers in 1943, received the rank of senior lieutenant. I won't say who was the first to be attracted to Nikolai Marusia or Marusia to him. As they both told me after the war, they had a mutual infatuation. But although the young men served in the same regiment, they rarely had to meet. The fighting was brutal. And only after the Battle of Stalingrad, in the spring when we were not involved in the fighting, their meetings became more frequent, and they decided to get married. It should be said that the battalion commander, Captain Ananenko, who was informed about this decision by Senior Lieutenant Smirnov, tried to prevent their marriage, believing that it would adversely affect the service of political officer and medic. And only after the intervention of the deputy commander of the regiment on the political part of Major Bezukov Kukarskaya and Smirnov formalized their relationship legally May 30th. 1943, they registered their marriage in the village council. And the next day Marusia and Nikolai came to the tent, where the regiment headquarters was located, and put on my desk a report to the regiment commander about their marriage. I congratulated them, wished them to live to victory, to be happy and healthy. I reported the report to Lieutenant Colonel Pansky, and he told me. The certificate from the village council is, of course, a document, but let's put this fact in the regimental order, just to be on the safe side. And so in the order for the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment of June 3rd, 1943, appeared paragraph 2, to approve the marriage of the deputy commander of the 1st Machine Gun Company in the 1st Rifle Company on PH Guards Senior Lieutenant Smirnov Nikolai Makalaevich and the commander of the Sanitary Platoon of the 1st Rifle Battalion Guards Petty Officer Medical Service Kukarskaya Maria Petrovna, and make appropriate changes in the records of personnel records. The front love turned out to be strong, stainless steel. And for 45 years Maria Petrovna and Nikolai Makarovich have been living together. After the war, they first settled in the Bryansk region, in Smirnov's homeland. And then he was sent to raise virgin land in Kokytov region. This wonderful family lives there until now. They have 2 daughters, 2 grandchildren. In 1973, Maria Petrovna became known not only in our country, but also in the whole world. To her 5 battle orders and medal for bravery received at the front was added another honorary award. By the decision of the International Red Cross Organization, she was awarded the Florence Nightingale Medal. And Nikolai Makarovich finished the war in the position of deputy battalion commander on political part. He was wounded several times. But apparently fate took care of him for the woman he loved. You can imagine how many anxious minutes our Marusia had to endure at the front, when an enemy bullet or a fragment of mine shell could any day take the life of his beloved. However, after all, and she herself all the time was on the front line, and death more than once looked into the eyes. On May 9th, the troops of the 5th Guards Army, by order of the Supreme Command, began to move to the area west of Stary Oskol. The 97th Guards Rifle Division, having made more than 300 kilometers march, by the morning of May 16th concentrated on the Oskol River in the area of Zalonoye, Yutkovo, Istobnoye. Unfortunately, the redeployment was not without a tragic accident. The thing is that the movement of our division passed through the territory, recently liberated from Hitler's invaders, and it had not yet had time to completely clear from enemy mines, unexploded shells and aircraft bombs. And here, at the detour of regiments, the staff car, in which was the commander of our division, Guards Major General M.A. Yuzenko, exploded on a mine. Literally 2 hours before his death, he visited our regiment, talked to the soldiers and commanders. And such a ridiculous death. However, in war accidental deaths are probably still quite a lot. During this period, all army troops, including our regiment, successfully prepared a powerful defensive line up to 40 kilometers deep in the area from Zauskolya to Belogo Kolodezia, where it was assumed the most likely direction of the enemy offensive. This was the first most important task of preparation for the summer military campaign of 1943. The second task, no less important, was to thoroughly prepare all personnel for the upcoming decisive battles. From the soldiers and commanders required a huge strain of strength. Judge for yourself, 6-8 hours a day we were engaged in combat training and 4-6 hours of daily defensive work. In the conditions of the heat it was quite difficult. Special attention was paid to fighting with tanks. Experienced soldiers taught young soldiers to adapt to the terrain, to use anti-tank rifles and grenades most effectively to hit the most vulnerable places of enemy vehicles. The training of personnel with tanks was of the utmost importance. For this purpose, at training ranges, tanks were used to drill trenches and trenches where there were soldiers, sergeants and officers. All training sessions were conducted with a view to maximizing the proximity to real combat conditions. Battalion and company exercises were conducted with live firing, with the use of hand-to-hand combat techniques at different times of the day, including night. The program of political training conducted by the political officers of the regiment was strictly observed. Party and Komsomol organizations worked actively. I remember the Komsomol meeting of the regiment, which I was able to attend. Members of the Komsomol messengers of the Komsomol of platoons, companies, battalions gathered in a nearby ravine. They sat down on a carpet of withered grass, not letting go of their weapons. The agenda, the words that at that time did not leave the lips of the Soviet soldiers liberators, "Let's avenge the fascist monsters for the ruined honor of the Soviet land." A short 10-minute report was made by the regiment commander, Guards Lieutenant Colonel P. R. Pansky. He said that the defeat of Hitler's hordes at Stalingrad shook the fascist empire to its foundations. Now the fascists would like to take revenge for the defeat, give us a decisive battle here, at the Kursk Bulge, and regain the initiative. But this will not happen, concluded the speaker. He called on the Komsomol members to be ready for decisive and skillful action. The first to speak in the debate was the commander of the platoon of Foot Reconnaissance Junior Lieutenant Afanasyev. "I myself am a Muscovite," he said. "But the Kursk land is dear to me as well as to all of us. Here in Kursk and Ural regions, our ancestors stood an insurmountable wall on the way of devastating raids of enemy hordes and hordes. And now the Kursk land, bristling with thousands of guns, machine guns, mortars, will not let the enemy pass. Our courage, fearlessness, selfless love for the motherland are the proof of that. I am a Kurian from near Stary Oskol," said in his speech the commander of the squad Senior Sergeant B. Bezlepkin. "I am defending my home. So together with you will not let uninvited guests on his doorstep. From the gate turn, we say to them today." Uzbek Yusupov, wounded the day before in the shoulder, took the floor. Having corrected the bandage on which his arm was hanging, he spoke excitedly. "I have already shed blood for the Kursk land, the Russian land, but I believe that here I was also defending my native Uzbekistan. There are many nations and nationalities in the Soviet Union, but the motherland is one. And we will defend it to the last breath." After the meeting, all soldiers went to their combat positions. By many signs it was possible to make sure that the morale of our fighters was on the rise, despite the great fatigue from classes and defensive work. Of great educational value for all the comrades in arms was an event that took place in the last days of June. On one of the sunny days, the soldiers, commanders and political workers from all our units lined up on the training ground, waiting for the start of the solemn ceremony of presenting the Guards' banner to the regiment. The command of the 97th Guards Rifle Division arrived at the regiment together with the commander of the 33rd Guards Rifle Corps, Guards Major General I. Popov. Konkor handed Lieutenant Colonel P.R. Pansky the Guards' banner and expressed confidence that the regiment will carry it through the smoke and flames of battle to complete victory over the enemy. In response, there was a loud hurrah. I saw how worried the regimental commander was as he accepted the banner. Then he recited the oath of the Guards, and all the soldiers, down on one knee, mentally repeated its words. Then the relic was passed into the hands of the flag-bearer of the regiment, the first holder of the Order of Patriotic War 2 degree, Gun Commander Senior Sergeant I. Karpukin. And when the platoon with the banner went around the formation of soldiers, again there was a loud, long hurrah. At the rally, the first word was given to Senior Lieutenant V. Kuzin, who said, V. Kuzin, who said, accepting the Guards' banner, we swear to defend the motherland not just courageously and skillfully, not sparing our blood and life to defeat the enemy, as the military oath says, but especially persistently and persistently, with selfless bravery and initiative of each fighter, in a boyish way, as it is supposed to real Guardsmen. Senior Sergeant A. Bondarenko urged the soldiers in his speech to multiply combat traditions, to multiply every day the combat account to achieve victory sooner. After the end of the rally, the regiment's units marched in a solemn march. On the same day, all soldiers of the regiment were awarded badges Guard. The command of the regiment supported the initiative of the soldiers to write a letter to fellow countrymen of Stavropol in connection with the awarding of the Guard rank to the regiment. It was sent to the Stavropol Regional Committee of the All-Union Communist Party. Soon a reply was received, which said, "We received your letter. We congratulate all of you on receiving the Guards rank. We wish you further success in the fight against the damned enemy. Your greetings to the workers of the region passed through the newspaper Stavropolskaya Pravda." Assignment of the Guards rank to the regiment meant not only handing it the Guards banner and signs Guards to all personnel. Guards rifle regiments since December 1942 became stronger than ordinary regiments. Each machine gun company had 12 machine guns instead of 9, and a platoon of 45 mm anti-tank guns appeared as part of a rifle battalion. The regiment headquarters was directly subordinate to the company of machine gunners, communications company and platoon's commandant, foot and mounted reconnaissance, sapper, chemical protection. The chief of artillery of the regiment had at his disposal, in fact, a division of 3 batteries 45 mm guns, 76 mm guns, and 120 mm mortars. As we can see, the chief of staff of the regiment had quite a lot of multi-caliber units at hand, the actions of which he had to coordinate in all types of combat and on the march. Since 1943, the Guards Rifle Regiment had to have about 3,000 men on the staff. But I can testify that in our regiment throughout the war was a constant shortage. As Chief of Staff, I had to deal a lot with regimental scouts. Once in one of the summer days I gathered them, and, passing the concerns of the command, said briefly, "We need to get a language." At night, the reconnaissance platoon, headed by Junior Lieutenant Afanasyev, went to the enemy positions behind the river Perisip. At first they walked, ducking down, along the sprouting rye field. Who could have guessed that this summer the tracks of tanks would be threshing the rye? 5 caught. 1 gone. A quail was broadcasting a little away. "It's not up to 5 here," grinned Malishko. "A merry-go-lucky fighter. We'd like at least one with a weaker tongue." Above the scouts' heads, German flares were drawing dazzling bright orange arcs. But here are already the coastal bushes of sedge and alder, hiding the narrow ribbon of the steppe rivulet. We crossed it in the ford. We looked into the darkness. Ahead, in the light of the rocket, a wattle-covered well caught our eye, and next to it the figure of a man with a bucket. Having scooped up water, he quickly moved away in the direction of the German battery, which we had discovered the day before. On the price passed to approach the commander. And when the scouts encircled Afanasyev, he said, "Have you seen everything? I think the Germans have him not the last water consumers. Let's lie down by the well." They lay down. Soldiers from the capture group closer, support group farther away. Some 20 or 30 minutes did not pass, as the canopy of the night watchfully opened a lanky kraut with buckets in his hands, who grew right in front of the scouts. They let him through, and immediately lost sight of him. Against the background of dark bushes he seemed to disappear. But soon we heard something like a scream. It turns out that at the very well-bent kraut saddled a few scouts led by the senior group Melishko. Pull back. Afanasyev's command sounded. Then several rockets soared into the sky. They plucked the scouts out of the darkness. He had German large-caliber machine guns struck. The chain heard. The platoon commander was wounded. Those who were closer to him ran up. Bullets pierced the commander's calves of the legs. He was picked up by scouts. The soldiers of the support group hit the battery with machine guns. The fire of the Nazis weakened. Hitlerovitz turned out to be talkative. He gave valuable testimony. Reported that their unit is preparing for an offensive. All received dry rations for 5 days. It should have been understood as follows: on the 6th day the fascists could count on hot food in Kursk towns and villages. But the hot food was delivered to the fascists at home. As it is known, a crushing artillery strike on the enemy was made all along the front. The shells covered the positions from which the avalanche of the fascist offensive was about to break. And the summer on the Kursk land was getting hotter and hotter. Breads rose to the waist and pleased the eyes of fellow soldiers, many of whom were hereditary farmers. However, the weeds that had overgrown wildly felt at ease on the fields. Not only the weather was getting hotter. According to many signs, the situation at the front was getting hotter. More and more often the regiment commander and I were called to the division headquarters for operational meetings. There we got acquainted with the new, just appointed commander of the 97th Guards Rifle Division, Guards Colonel I. Antsyferov. One day he returned from the army headquarters and informed all the commanders present at the meeting that the commander of the 5th Guards Army, Lieutenant General A.S. Zhadov, on behalf of the commander of the Voronezh Front, Army General N.F. Vatutin, put us on notice that according to available data, in the near future is expected to attack the enemy at Kursk. The situation may be so that our troops will have to go to the threatened direction on the signal of the battle alarm. Therefore, all units and subdivisions must be in full combat readiness. On July 5, 1943, the Battle of Kursk began with the offensive of the Nazi troops in the direction of Kursk from the areas of Belgorod and Oral. Our regiment was ordered to go to the combat area on the night of July 9th. Together with other parts of the division, we began a rapid march and in 2 days arrived in the area of Oboyan Prokhorovka. And though the mother infantry got used to measure versts with their feet for 2 years of war, this march was especially hard. During the day, exhausting heat, at night some stagnant stuffiness. We were walking along country roads, and next to us on their roadsides on the right and left were moving columns of tanks and artillery on caterpillar traction. You can imagine how much dust we had to swallow, how much sweat we had to shed. After the first afternoon, the regiment commander was summoned to the division headquarters, and he ordered me to lead the march. I called to me the commanders of rifle battalions and combat support and service units and set them tasks for the second day's march. Particular attention was drawn to the need for rapid dispersal of personnel on the signal air. The day before, enemy planes bombed the column several times, and the regiment had several dozen dead and wounded. The division's combat task was not easy: to close the defence to prevent the enemy from reaching the road section of Boyan-Kursk, to stop him at the line south of Peresip, Kartashevka, to defeat the enemy and lead the offensive from the areas west of Prokhorovka in the direction of Koshetovka. The combat order of the division was built in 2 echelons. In the first echelon was our 289th Guards Regiment. The combat order of the regiment was also built in 2 echelons. In the first echelon held the defence of the 2nd Rifle Battalion, Guards Major R. O. Bolkvadze, and the 3rd Rifle Battalion, commanded by Guards Senior Lieutenant P. I. Pikalenko. In the 2nd echelon was the 1st Battalion of Guards Captain M.F. Ananenko. We learned that by the end of July 9th, the Nazi troops managed to cut into the defence of the Voronezh front in the Oboyansk direction to a depth of 35 kilometres. But the enemy could not advance further here and shifted its efforts to the Prokhorovskoe direction, that is, to the defence area, where our 5th Guards and 5th Guards tank armies were advanced. The main events began to unfold on July 11th. The enemy threw into battle 4 dozen tanks, including Tigers and Panthers, which covered the advance of enemy infantry. Up to 100 aircraft Junkers 87 and Junkers 88 attacked our positions from the air. The ground shook from the numerous bursts of mines, shells and bombs. There were killed and wounded. And then there was heat, there was nothing to breathe. The soldiers' uniforms were drenched with sweat and became black. Thirst was overpowering. And still Hitlerites were met by dense fire of our units, which withstood a powerful onslaught of the enemy, who suffered heavy losses in manpower and equipment. During the night of July 12th, the heat noticeably decreased. It became easier to breathe. In the lowlands, even coolness began to smell. Shooting subsided, but this calm was deceptive. We all guessed that such a lull happens before a storm. The Soviet command made a decision to make a powerful counterattack in the morning of July 12th and destroy the encroaching enemy. At 8:30, the 5th Guards Army of Lieutenant General A. S. Jadov and the 5th Guards Tank Army of Lieutenant General of Tank Troops P. A. Rotmistrov, after a powerful artillery and air preparation, launched a counterattack. At the same time, the German troops strike group consisting of the 4th Tank Army, units of the 2nd SS Tank Corps, and troops of the Kempf-Kiev Group began their offensive. Near Prokhorovka, 2 armoured avalanches met. More than 1,200 tanks and self-propelled guns participated on both sides in this largest counter-tank battle in the history of the war. The powerful blow of our tank formations was a great surprise for the Nazis. The fierce fight lasted until late in the evening. Multi-ton steel machines were turned into piles of metal scrap. Towers, gun barrels flew from tanks, tracks were torn to pieces. Clouds of dust and smoke covered everything around. Both sides suffered heavy losses. The 97th Guards Rifle Division had a heavy task to fight with enemy tanks and infantry, which were on the left flank of the main tank wedge, aimed at Prokhorovka. Fierce fighting unfolded on the site of our 289th Guards Rifle Regiment. The enemy threw into the battle their praised tanks Tiger and Panther, self-propelled guns Ferdinand. They were followed by infantry, supported from the air by aviation. The Soviet soldiers unleashed a powerful barrage of fire from all kinds of weapons on the advancing fascists. Artillery opened fire on the enemy tanks. Riflemen guards, letting the enemy tanks through their trenches, with fire and grenades cut off the fascist infantry from the tanks and exterminated it. 5 enemy tanks moved to the area, where there was a platoon of PTR under the command of Guards Lieutenant D. A. Hassanov. He ordered to let the enemy tanks as close as possible, and when they were 150 to 200 meters away, he was the first to open fire and immediately hit 1 tank. And in total in this battle, Hassanov put out of action 3 fascist tanks. Exceptional courage and enviable cold-bloodedness were shown in repulsing the tank attack by the commander of the anti-tank gun, Guards Sergeant P. K. Temnikov and Gunner T.P. Antoshkevich. Firing direct fire, they hit an enemy tank and disabled a vehicle with infantry, and then set fire to 2 more enemy tanks. On this day there was a break in the development of the defensive battle on the southern phase of the Kursk protrusion, where our 5th Guards Army acted. The main forces of the enemy moved to the defense. He was exhausted and exsanguinated. Only in the Prokhorovka tank battle the Germans lost 400 tanks and more than 10,000 soldiers and officers. During the next 5 or 6 days there were continuous battles with enemy tanks and infantry. Attacks and counterattacks replaced each other in day and night. Until July 16th, the German troops still held their captured lines, and then under the onslaught of the Soviet troops began to withdraw to their original positions. Our division had to fight fierce battles for the village of Kushetovka, overcoming enemy resistance. The 289th and 294th Guards Rifle Regiments went on the offensive and fought for the village. It was July 19th. Our regiment acted in the first echelon. In the battle for this village many distinguished themselves, but I want to tell about the feat of 11 soldiers led by the Partugum of the 1st Rifle Company, Guards Senior Sergeant Lubaskin. When bypassing Kushetovka Company met strong fire resistance of the enemy. The company commander was killed. He was replaced by the platoon commander, Guards Lieutenant V.M. Fomin. He selected 11 brave men, led by Guards Staff Sergeant Lebaskin, ordered them to break into the village and divert enemy fire from the main forces of the company. They solved the task successfully, ensured the advance of the unit to the dominant height 226.6. But only one of the 11 survived guards, Private Javaldan. Severely wounded, he was picked up by local resident Marfa Dmitrievna Chibatava and hid in her dugout. All night she took care of him, and in the morning handed him over to the soldiers of our regiment, which liberated Koshetovka. Lebaskina's group, having broken into the village, raised a real commotion there. Hitlerites threw more than a company of their soldiers against it. The fight broke out. At the most difficult moment, when fascists rushed to attack, Lebaskin shouted to his comrades, "Friends of Stalingrad, not a step back, otherwise they'll crush our whole company with a blow from the rear." The guardsmen fought to the last bullet. They died, but didn't leave their positions. Here are their names: Guards Staff Sergeant Matvey Lebaskin, Guards Sergeants Ivan Olenikov and Dmitry Elagin, Guards Sergeant Murat Aminov, Guards Private Peter Pozdiny, Zalepis Ishmanov, Kalimzan Yunusov, Ivan Vodnev, Umar Abdazanov, and Turdybai Mambataliv. All of them were buried with military honours in the village of Kochetovka. Submissions for awarding soldiers these documents of courage passed through my hands. I signed each of them together with the regiment commander. Here are excerpts from the award list for Guards Junior Lieutenant I. Alf Osadchego, platoon commander of the 3rd Rifle Company. On July 19th, 1943, in the battle for the village of Kochetovka, Kursk region, the company commander was killed, and the company control was broken. Simultaneously, 3 platoon commanders were put out of action, and the men lay down under enemy fire, suffering losses. Then Osadchi took command of the company and led it behind him. Being wounded and concussed, he did not leave the battlefield until he came out with the company to the specified line. Having liberated Kochevka, we didn't stay there long. The 97th Guards Rifle Guards launched an attack on Pokrovka, Yakovlevo. True, we had to hold rallies and subdivisions. And the reason for this was a leaflet, issued by the political department of the division, with the text of a letter of Kochetovka residents, which they addressed to the guardsmen, who liberated the village from the German invaders. The excited words of this message seared into the soul of every fighter. "Our dear comrades," said in the letter, "for 9 days from July 10th to July 19th, the Nazi occupiers dominated our village. Those were black days of captivity. If you had not come to our aid in time, dozens more innocent inhabitants would have died. Many more of our girls and women would have been dishonored. Our nests would have been finally ruined. Kochetovka used to be a flourishing village of several hundred yards. You can see for yourself what is left of it now. Only burnt ovens and ruins. Fascist scoundrels took away almost all the cattle from the village, ate calves and poultry, looted the houses of collective farmers. Only your arrival, our dear liberators, brought us back to human life again, spared us from murders, the tortures and abuse. You went into battle for a Russian village, unfamiliar to you. Without sparing your lives, you fought courageously and bravely. Thank you very much for that. Comrades of the Guards, fight the enemy as bravely and courageously, and in the future, drive him from our land." On July 23rd, our division came to the dominant height 233.6, covering the approaches to Tomarivka. Our further advance was stopped by strong rifle and machine gun, mortar and artillery fire of the enemy. The division commander, Colonel I. Ant Sifarov, ordered our regiment to seize the height, but it was not possible to do it from the start. It turned out to be well fortified. Therefore, based on the experience of fighting in Stalingrad, I suggested to the regiment commander to create assault groups of 8-12 soldiers, led by an officer. One of such groups was headed by Guards Senior Lieutenant Malikov, who before the battle was given a party card. Candidate cards were given together with him to the machine gunners Leontiev, Korogodin, Molovanchuk, Ipatov, Savin, Siniev, Belis, who were included in this assault group. Together with the Partorg Captain Borozinets, I congratulated them on receiving party documents. All of them assured that they would not fail in battle and would fight as befits communists. And they kept their word. After a short but powerful artillery preparation on the enemy fortifications on July 26 at 16:00, the Guardsmen rushed into the attack. The soldiers of the assault groups approached the height by short runs. The group of Guards Senior Lieutenant Malikov, acting on the right flank, was ahead of everyone. By order of the regiment commander, Guards Lieutenant Colonel P.R. Pansky, one of the best machine gunners, Kazakh Guards Private Alimbayev, was assigned to hoist the red flag on the height. But he failed to carry it to the top. He was mortally wounded. The flag from his hands was picked up by Guards Private M. K. Kichkaev. He hoisted it at the height. Faster, but at the same time cautious actions of the assault groups allowed to seize the height without significant losses. They were supported by their fire mortar platoons under the command of Guards Senior Lieutenants A. E. Kuznetsov and P.A. Parabanos. In this battle, Machine Gunner Guards Petty Officer V. Lysyansky distinguished himself. Having taken a convenient position on the slope of the height, he was firing skillfully, suppressing several enemy firing points. I knew Lysyansky well, a former Donetsk miner, a man of great physical strength. With his Maxim he worked wonders on the battlefield, and so I was happy to sign on him a submission to the award of the order. At the end of July we sent Petty Officer Lysyansky to the courses of junior lieutenants, and after a while he returned to the regiment with 1 star on his epaulettes. Courage and bravery were shown in this battle by the Communications Officers Guards Senior Lieutenant N.E. Merkin and Guards Junior Lieutenant S.G. Komarov. Under enemy fire, they together with telephonists restored the communication line. In those days, of course, we did not know that the Supreme Command developed an operation under the conventional name Commander-in-Chief Rumyantsev, which would later go down in the history of the Great Patriotic War as the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive operation of the Voronezh and Steppe fronts, which ended the Battle of Kursk. It lasted from August 3rd to August 23rd, until the liberation of Kharkov. During the operation, 15 enemy divisions were defeated, including 4 tank divisions. Our troops advanced 140 kilometers to the south and southwest, extending the offensive front to 300 kilometers. There were created favorable conditions for the liberation of the left bank Ukraine and access to the Dnieper. Our division at the end of July rejoined the 32nd Guards Rifle Corps, commanded by hero of the Soviet Union Major General A.I. Rumyantsev, the commander of the Division I. Ant Syfarov set a new combat task to break through the enemy's defense in the area of 3 km wide and go to the area of Tomarovka and Borisovka villages. The first to begin the artillery preparation at exactly 5 a.m. on August 3, 1943, were our famous Guards mortars Katyusha. Together with the fiery tornado of rocket artillery, the shells of heavy guns rained down on the enemy's head, and from the air aerial bombs. I had never seen such a powerful artillery and aviation preparation. During 3 hours the enemy's front line was practically not visible neither in stereo telescopes, nor in powerful field binoculars. Everything was covered with clouds of smoke and dust. But it was not surprising. On the breakthrough areas there were concentrated up to 230 guns and mortars and up to 70 tanks and SAUR per kilometre of the front. The enemy's defence was clearly paralysed, and his return artillery fire was disorderly and weak. The front edge of the Hitlerites' defence was covered with continuous bursts of shells, mines and bombs. Artillery and aviation fire suppressed and destroyed the enemy fighting order. At 8 o'clock in the morning, supported by tanks, our troops resolutely attacked the enemy positions. In the area where the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment operated, the Germans resisted desperately. However, the Guards slowly but steadily moved forward. Our offensive was noticeably accelerated when at noon the advanced units of the 1st Tank Army of Lieutenant General M. E. Katukov, outrunning the infantry, broke through the enemy defences. On August 4th, the Germans withdrew in the direction of the village Tomarovka. Our regiment reached the Bezimianaya height, which is northeast of this village. 2 days later, pressing the enemy and bypassing Tomarovka, the regiment saddled a section of the road Borisovka-Stanovoy, about a kilometre from Borisovka. On this village, the Germans had high hopes, expecting to create in it a node of defence. But it was a futile effort. The regiment blocked Borisovka from the southeast, other parts of the division blocked the enemy escape routes to the southwest, and the Nazis had nothing to do but to fight their way out of the encirclement. But all their attempts to withdraw to Berezovka and Khotmishsk were not successful. When it became known at the regimental headquarters that a column of Germans with the strength of up to a company and 5 tanks was moving along one of the country roads from Borisovka, the regimental commander ordered me. Take a company of automatic riflemen, a battery of magpies, ride the country road and not a single Kraut to leave. Got it? I called the company commander, Guard Senior Lieutenant Makarov, the battery commander, Guard Senior Lieutenant Radchenko, to the CP and gave them the task to choose positions for infantry and guns near the Kruglaya Grove to block the way of the Germans. I knew these officers well from the battles near Stalingrad and was sure that they would do everything properly. And indeed, when in half an hour I arrived at the place they had chosen, I was convinced that the firing positions of the guns, trenches for machine gunners and machine gunners, were well located. I had hardly had time to exchange a few words with the officers when the dust began to swirl on the country lane, the rumble of engines and the clanking of tracks was heard. The first were the tanks. Joseph Radchenko decided to let them get closer and opened fire when the vehicles were about 400 meters away. 2 tanks were hit by the first shots. But the remaining 3 opened return fire and knocked out 2 of our guns. One had a jammed breech. The other had a damaged swivel mechanism. The German infantry following the tanks during the artillery firefight lay low, and then rose up and rushed to the attack. Our soldiers with fire from machine guns and automatic rifles pinned it to the ground. Tanks took cover in roadside beams. At that time I was at Radchenko's NP. Comrade Guards Major heard his voice. Gunmasters Shkarupa and Gorval should be here. They will fix the damage in no time. We'll have a hard time with 2 guns if the Germans come again. I turned the knob of the field phone. The communicator at the regiment's CP answered. He was ordered to call to the phone guard's Senior Lieutenant Kodenko. The head of the artillery workshop had to be there. And indeed, soon his voice rumbled in the receiver. Nikolai Mikhailovich, I said to him, get in the trophy truck, take 2 gunners with you. Throw a dozen boxes of shells and grenades for Radchenko in the back and come here. Do you know where we are now? I know, Comrade Guards Major. I was there when you gave him and Makarov the task. I'll be there in about 30 minutes. Not even half an hour later, a trophy car stopped near the firing position. Guards Senior Sergeants G.D. Gorval and M.S. Shkarupa under the guidance of N.M. Kodenko. Kodenko took up the task and jamming the bolt on one of the guns eliminated quickly. But with the repair of the rotary mechanism on the other gun they had to deal longer. But this gun was put into operation. The gunmasters had golden hands. How many times they and other specialists had to repair guns, mortars, machine guns, often right in the firing position, under enemy fire. And the artillery task force, as a rule, was always at my or the regiment commander's fingertips. I do not know why, but for some time the Germans did not try to break through again. Maybe they were waiting for reinforcements. But apparently they did not wait. In 2 hours, 3 tanks crawled out of their hiding places and came at us, and the infantry rushed after them. But even this attempt of the enemy ended in failure for him. Artillerymen hit 2 tanks, and the last one turned back. Probably its crew decided to find a way around. The Nazi soldiers lay down again, and then the survivors turned back and disappeared from sight. We did not pursue them. And by the evening of August 6th, the headquarters and the rear of the regiment were already in Borisovka, which was liberated by the parts of our division. We took the defence on the northwestern outskirts of the village. In the battle for Borisovka, we captured a mill with a stock of grain and flour, a food store, fuel, spare parts for tanks, ammunition, engineering equipment. As spoils of war, the regiment received 20 serviceable Tiger tanks, 3 TIV tanks and 4 vehicles. By the end of the day on August 7th, the division completed the liquidation of the enemy group encircled near Borisovka. 1,200 Hitler's soldiers were taken prisoner. And the trophy team spent the whole day counting the serviceable combat equipment abandoned by the Nazis, including 48 tanks, 300 automobiles, 3 echelons with arms and ammunition. In these days there was an event which with pain in the heart was perceived by all soldiers of our regiment. It became known to us that a prominent fellow countryman of my fellow soldiers, Stavropol resident, hero of the Civil War, Army General Joseph Rodionovich Apanasenko, died. In early June, he arrived from the post of commander of the Far Eastern Front to train as deputy commander of the Voronezh Front. Heading from the command post of our 5th Guards Army to his car, he was hit by a bombing raid and was seriously wounded. Prominent Soviet military commander R. Apanasenko died in Belgorod on August 5, 1943, the day of the liberation of this city. In his suicide note, he asked to be buried in the city of Stavropol. The general's request was fulfilled. On Komsomolskaya Hill in the center of Stavropol over his grave is a monument, at the foot of which live flowers all year round. On August 11th, our regiment was ordered to leave early in the morning along the route Babkov, Lozovoy, Merlo, Zabroda, Logovaya, Krysino in order to cut together with other parts of the division highway Kharkov-Sumy. By the end of the day, the regiment took the defense north of Krysino. On August 12th, the enemy launched a powerful counterattack from the area south of Bogodukov, using the armor and firepower of 3 SS tank divisions Reich, Viking and Deadhead. The Germans had a goal to get to the rear of our troops, including the 5th Guards Army. The main blow came to the 97th Guards Rifle Division, and therefore the positions of our regiment. On the left flank of our defence, the Germans, with the strength of up to a battalion of infantry, under cover of 20 tanks, bypassed the 1st Rifle Battalion. At the same time, the enemy began to attack from the right flank, having moved there 5 tanks and a company of machine gunners. Under the threat of encirclement was the command post of the regiment, headquarters, and its units. Communication with the battalions was interrupted. From the division headquarters, the order was received by radio, "Hold on. We will help you." At this point, the communication stopped, as our radio station was broken by a direct hit of a shell. The regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Pansky, was not at the CP at that time. He was at the CP of the commander of the 1st Battalion, and I had to organize the battle with the enemy who had broken through. I honestly confess, for 2 front years I got into such a mess for the first time. Even in the encirclement near the village of Zielobok in the summer of 1942, and in Stalingrad it seemed to be easier. I thought then, in a small forest to the south of the farm Golovanova, that probably not to get out alive from this scorcher. First of all, I took care to preserve the Battle Guards banner of the regiment. I called the commander of the commandant platoon, Guards Petty Officer I, D. Ponomarenko, and ordered him to give the cloth of the banner to Guards Sergeant P. Y. Dobroskokov, assigning him 3 machine gunners. I knew Dobroskokov well as a skillful and brave warrior, and was confident that he would be able to deliver the banner to the location of the regiment. Then we organized the defense of the CP and the regiment headquarters by the surviving soldiers of the machine gun companies, communications, sapper platoon, platoons of foot, reconnaissance and chemical protection. Until the onset of darkness we managed to hold out. But it was clear that at dawn the Germans would attack again and we would die in an unequal battle. Therefore, I decided to break through the encirclement at night in 2 independent groups. One group was commanded by Captain Belousov, the regiment's chief of intelligence, and the other was led by me. The night was dark. The Germans, apparently confident that we have nowhere to go, relaxed their vigilance, and both groups managed to break through almost without losses. By 11:00 on August 13th, all headquarters units concentrated in the gully, through which flows the Merla River, 2 kilometers southwest of the city of Bogokov, and soon there came and battalions led by the regimental commander. But the cloth of the Battle Guards banner was handed to me, not by Guards Sergeant Dobroskokov, but by the commander of the mortar platoon, Guards Lieutenant V. N. Stepanov. It turned out that the sergeant was seriously wounded just at the position of the mortar platoon, where he made his way with the machine gunners accompanying him, and handed the banner to the officer. For saving the battle banner, Guards Lieutenant Stepanov was awarded the Order of the Red Star. I must note that our regiment was in a difficult situation also because not all the soldiers received the day before through the field district military commissions were armed. There were enough small arms in the ammunition depot, but the head of the artillery of the regiment, Captain Vasiliev, showed criminal carelessness and sluggishness. He was therefore dismissed from his post and tried by a military tribunal. The verdict was usual for such a case at the front. This generally energetic, brave, never despondent officer was demoted to private and sent to a penalty battalion. What can you do? The laws of war are harsh. True, soon we learned that Vasiliev in the first battle bravely fought with the Nazis, atoned for his guilt with blood, and was restored in rank and position. But he was no longer in our regiment. NM Kodenko, who by that time had fought in our regiment for more than a year, was appointed the Chief of Artillery Armament. On August 14th, the regiment's CP was relocated to the eastern outskirts of Bogakov. Until the last days of this month we had to fight with the defending enemy. Then his resistance weakened, and we began to pursue the German units rolling back to the west and southwest. On August 23rd, we were glad to learn that the troops of the Steppe Front, with the assistance of our Voronezh and southwestern fronts, liberated Kharkov. Thus ended the Battle of Kursk, which finally consolidated the strategic initiative in the hands of the Soviet command, created favorable conditions for the deployment of a general strategic offensive of the Red Army. The victory at Kursk and the exit of our troops to the Dnieper River completed a radical turning point in the course of the Great Patriotic War. Autumn in Ukraine is always a desirable time. After the harvesting season, the harvest is already in the bins. Village markets with their flood of colours are no worse than Gogol's Sorochinsky fair. No wedding is without merry round dances. Everyone knows about it, everyone remembers it, but it was not always so. The fall of 1943 was the third and last, when the devastating tornado of war was still raging on the Ukrainian land. On the way to the Dnieper, we did not meet a single settlement not destroyed by the enemy. Only brick hulks of ovens were distinctly sticking out on the places of ashes, as if crying to the sky for revenge for the ruined life. Retreating, Hitlerites did not spare even animals. We saw cows, goats, and sheep with their bellies torn open, geese and chickens trampled into the ground. We did not see haystacks and golden stacks of straw in the meadows, which are usual at this time, camped in the field. The gardens, which before were always crowned with stately sunflowers, orchards with branches bent to the ground from the weight of fruits, apiaries, all this was ruined by Hitlerites. My heart boiled with rage at the sight of such barbarity. I saw how the soldiers, passing through the extinct villages, angrily clenched their teeth, heard how they cursed at anything Hitler and his looting army. But no matter how much the enemy resisted and maligned, his fate after the Battle of Stalingrad and the Battle of Kursk was predetermined. The Soviet troops began decisive actions to cleanse the native land from Hitler's filth. In early September 1943, it became known that the 5th Guards Army, which included our 97th Guards Rifle Division, by the decision of the Supreme Command was again transferred to the Steppe Front, commanded by Army General I.S. Konov. We fought hard battles with the German units that were resisting stubbornly. The regiment, as part of the division, was advancing in the southwestern direction to Mikhailovka, Dolina, Makady, bypassing Poltava. On September 12th, pressing the enemy to the west, we entered the territory of Poltava region. I remember the battle for Mikhailovka, located about 20 kilometers north of Poltava, halfway to Dikanka. On the night of September 18th, the regiment stealthily approached this settlement and rushed into its streets from 2 directions. Darkness ensured the suddenness of the attack. Unable, apparently, to quickly assess the situation, Hitlerites scattered, opened indiscriminate fire, which did not cause much damage to our units. However, soon they came to their senses and even made a counterattack against one of our companies. A platoon under the command of Komsomol Guards Junior Lieutenant A. I. Tolchin came to its rescue. The riflemen went into the flank of the Germans, opened a strong rifle and machine gun fire, and the enemy counterattack was smothered. Distinguished himself in this battle and company commander, Guards Lieutenant D.P. Kashin, also a Komsomolets. With a machine gun crew, he chose a good position, and when the Germans began to retreat after another counterattack, he himself lay down behind the machine gun and opened fire on them. The young officer was wounded, but did not leave the battlefield. Tolchin and Kashin were awarded the Medal for Bravery. Joyful for me was the day of September 19th. On this day in newspapers was published another order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief about liberation of 8 cities of Ukraine from German invaders. Among them was my hometown, the city of Romy. For more than 2 years I knew nothing about the fate of my mother Ksenia Grigorievna, my sisters Sophia and Vera, who remained in the village of Loknya near Romy. I knew that my brothers Nikolai, Alexander and Sergei were at the front. But are they alive? I received the last letter from my mother in early September 1941, when I was in the hospital after being wounded in the first battles. Of course, in order not to worry my mother, I did not inform her about my wounding, but the heart of all mothers, as you know, is a teller. Are you not in the hospital, son? She asked me. Something painfully detailed began to write. Don't hide anything from me. I taught all of you, my dear children, to always tell the truth. Remember that even a small untruth brings great excitement. I had to confess to my mother that I was really in the hospital, but my affairs were on the mend. And now Romy was liberated. I immediately wrote a letter to my mother. By the way, this letter has been preserved. After the war, my nephew Genya, my sister's son, gave it to me. The paper is yellowed and shriveled, some letters are blurred. My mother must have shed more than one tear while reading it. It may be immodest to quote myself, but let the reader forgive me if I quote a few lines from this Frontline message. Good afternoon, dear Mummy. I tell you that I am still alive and well, and I wish the same to you. I don't know if our village has been liberated, but I know that Romy, Glinsk, Talalalavka have been liberated, and I was looking forward to it. I don't know if I'll be able to re-establish contact with you. Dear Mummy, I won't write much about myself. I live well. 2 years at the fronts, liberating my country from Hitler's bandits. It's a pity I didn't have to go to my homeland. I've been decorated 3 times, right where Nikolai, Shura, Seriosha, Sonia, Vera. I've had and have no contact with anyone. Goodbye. A big kiss. Your son Yuri. My address field post 44721A, 19.ix.1943. Apparently I was not sure that the letter would fall into the hands of my mother, so I made the following note. Comrades, who will read this letter, please write me about her fate, about the fate of brothers Nikolai, Alexander, Sergei, and about sisters Sophia and Vera. I appeal to the inhabitants of the village. Loknya. I am the son of Ksenia Grigorievna Normenko, who lives on the farm Bugaychika. In those days I had a conversation with the commander of the communications company, Guards Captain Sergei Grigorievich Zinchenko. It was about the organization of communication between units during offensive battles. Zinchenko reported to me his thoughts on this matter, the plan of distribution of forces and means of communication. Despite his youth, he had already fought only in our regiment for more than a year, went through Stalingrad, Kursk and accumulated good experience in the organization of communication in all types of combat. We finished our official conversations. The captain asked permission to leave the regiment's CP, but I see that he is very upset about something. What's wrong with you, Sergei? I ask. I should be happy I reached my native Poltava region. I knew that he was born in the village of Okotovoy, Semyonovsky district. How far is it to your village? Yuri Andreevich, says Zinchenko. To Semenovka in a straight line to the west is less than 100 kilometers. Maybe I'll be lucky and I'll see my native places. But what awaits me there? That's why I'm upset. I don't know what happened to my relatives. I wrote a letter to my mother. But Sergei Grigorievich had to visit his native village because after Poltava our regiment turned sharply to the southwest, to Kremenchug. By the end of September 21st, having fought over 100 kilometers, the division reached the eastern bank of the Vorskla River and received the order to prepare for its forcing. Our regiment came to the crossing southwest of Voron. The troops of the 5th Guards Army had to liberate Poltava, on the outskirts of which the Nazis concentrated large forces, including the SS tank division Dead Head. The importance and great significance of this operation could already be judged by the fact that the command post of the army came to the commander of the steppe front, Army General I. S. Konev. In his book 4 Years of War, former commander of the 5th Guards Army Gen. S. Shadov recalls how Army General Konev told him. The terrain in the strip of the upcoming offensive is really bad. But your sight forcing the river coincides with the place of crossing the army of Peter the Great before the battle with the Swedes at Poltava. Well, if the Russians pass, then we will pass too. The front commander also visited the command post of the 97th Guards Rifle Division, which was ordered to force the Vorskla in the area of Mikhailovka to seize the settlements Dolina, Makady, and reach the section of the railroad Poltava-Lubny in the area of Rishetilovka. The division was to attack in two echelons. In the first echelon acted two regiments, our 289th and 294th, in the second 292nd Guards Rifle Regiment. The conditions for forcing the Vorskla were extremely unfavourable. The bridge across the river was blown up. We had no special means of crossing. On the right bank, 223rd Infantry Division of Hitlerites was entrenched. We knew that it was shattered in the previous battles, but it could hold the defence on the previously prepared line quite well. On the night of September 22nd, the first to force the river were the automatons of the 289th and 294th Guards Regiments. Having reached the right bank, they seized a bridgehead and quickly entrenched. The Germans fiercely resisted. Shooting from both sides did not stop for a minute. Our soldiers, automatic soldiers, were moving forward with a fight to expand the bridgehead and provide a crossing for the battalions of the first echelon. With a decisive blow, the Guards knocked the enemy out of the first and second trenches. By the morning of September 22nd, the main forces of the division crossed the right bank of the Vorskla and captured the village Rudka, forcing the fascist units to retreat. And by noon, our guardsmen liberated Makarenki, Slinkov Yar, Stasovsi, Kurovlevka, Pavlovka, cut the road Dikanka-Poltava. We did not go to Dikanka itself, but we saw the ruins of this famous Ukrainian village praised by Gogol. And again, as in my childhood, I wanted to read Evenings on a Farm near Dikanka, novels published by beekeeper Rudy Pank, to plunge into the world of those native to me as a Ukrainian images of Solopi, Sherevik, and Paraska Black-Eyed Gana, and Levko, Oksana and Blacksmith Vakula, to Soloka and Pasyuk. I involuntarily remembered how my grandfather neighbour once in summer, having sown the Bashtan, moved to live in the Kuren, took us boys with him to drive away sparrows and magpies. It was a pleasure. Having run after the birds, we started to eat. Naturally, we had a great appetite. It happened that one could eat so many watermelons and melons during the day, and in addition to them turnips, sibuli, peas and other greens, that one's stomach would inflate like a drum. It was not easy for the regiment to move forward. The 3rd Rifle Battalion was ordered to seize the height of 175.8, near the village of Perarub. In the afternoon of September 22nd, the battalion's fighting order was counterattacked with the support of 8 tanks by the enemy infantry. And perhaps our riflemen would have had a hard time if the soldiers of the 1st Rifle Battalion had not come to their aid. By joint efforts, the counterattack was repulsed and the height was taken. In this battle was wounded Deputy Commander of the 1st Rifle Battalion on the political part of the Guards, Senior Lieutenant V. Kuzin. By the end of the day, the regiment's units, pursuing the enemy, came to the southwestern outskirts of the village of Sirodovka. Here, for the first time for several days of almost continuous fighting, the soldiers were allowed a short rest. And at once the chimneys of the camp kitchens began to smoke, which all this time could hardly keep up with the advancing units. By that time, the situation was such that the divisions of the 32nd Guards Rifle Corps were overhanging Poltava from the north and northwest, creating a threat of encirclement of the Poltava group of the enemy. The units of our 97th Guards Rifle Division captured the settlements of Dolina, Borshadsky, Makady. The German fascist command was forced to withdraw part of its forces from under Poltava. The command of the 5th Guards Army took advantage of this and ordered the 33rd Guards Rifle Corps to break into the city on the night of September 23rd and seize it. Throughout the night there were fierce battles in almost every street. The first to penetrate into the city centre were the Scouts, who hoisted a red flag on the ancient monument in honour of the victory of Russian arms over the Swedes in the historic Battle of Poltava, the Obelisk of Glory. By morning, the regional centre, a major Ukrainian city, was completely cleared of German fascist invaders. Our troops were opened the road to the Dnieper. On the same day, Moscow saluted the troops who liberated Poltava, By order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, the units and formations that participated in the battles for the liberation of Poltava, including our 97th Guards Rifle Division, were given the honorary name of Poltava, and the division commander, Guards Colonel I. Ant Safarov received the rank of Guards Major General. In all our units and subdivisions held rallies. With great enthusiasm they were held in our regiment. Soldiers, sergeants and officers swore to beat the hated enemy even harder and to liberate the whole Soviet Ukraine as soon as possible. One of the best scouts, Guards Sergeant A. Vinogradov excitedly said at the rally, "Many thousands more Soviet citizens, languishing in Hitler's captivity, are waiting for us. Forward for our native Dnieper, for the motherland." But at these words my heart beat often and strongly. I could not even believe that soon I would be back in those places where this war began for me. The pictures of those long summer days of the 41st came to life with piercing clarity in my memory, flashes of fires, black smoke, bursts of bombs and shells, whistling of bullets and shrapnel. At that time I could not imagine that I was waiting for the battles near Rostov-on-Don, Stalingrad, at the Kursk Bulge. Could I have thought then that I would return to the Dnieper banks after long months of almost continuous heavy fighting, through the bitterness of defeats, farewells to my comrades and friends, through the difficult joys of victories? Our regiment was moving forward with battles, approaching the Dnieper, along the route Vergany-Rublevka, Donovka, Maximovka. On September 29th, the fighting for Kremenchug began. We acted northwest of the city. Kremenchug was liberated on the same day, and the troops of the 5th Guards Army went directly to the left bank of the Dnieper. Just 6 days ago our division was given an honorary name, and by the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR on September 29th, 1943, it was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for its participation in the liberation of Kremenchug, and became known as the 97th Guards Poltava Red Banner Rifle Division. We were all, of course, proud of it. The command of the 5th Guards Army perfectly understood that it was impossible to delay the forcing of the Dnieper, but it was very difficult. As was established by reconnaissance, the Germans thoroughly fortified on the right bank of the river. All the dominant heights and nearby settlements they adapted to a circular defence. The enemy positions were covered with minefields and barbed wire fences. The enemy kept the opposite bank in the crosshairs of their firearms for a considerable distance along the front and in depth. The situation was complicated by the fact that on the left bank of the Dnieper, in those areas where our troops were located, there were no hidden approaches to the river. This deprived us of the opportunity to accumulate forces and equipment unnoticed. In addition, the soil here was sandy, viscous, loose. In many places it was worth to dig with a spade, as subsoil water immediately appeared. There was also another objective difficulty: stretched communications, which made it difficult to bring ammunition and material in a timely manner. And the units, including our regiment, after almost continuous fighting since the Battle of Prokhorovka, were not fully staffed with men and military equipment. During the day, the personnel of the regiment put in order the material part and engaged in the preparation of crossing means. This, apparently, did not escape the attention of the enemy. The reconnaissance flights of fascist aviation became more frequent over our positions. On the night of October 1st, we tried to ferry a reconnaissance group to the right bank of the river. But as soon as the boats appeared on the open water, flares flew from the Germans. The Nazis pounded the landing party with fierce mortar and machine gun fire, and the scouts were forced to return. After some time they moved to a new place and made a second attempt to cross to the bank occupied by the enemy. And again, because of heavy fire, the fulfillment of the combat mission had to be postponed. During the first half of the day, on October 2nd, our scouts observed the movement of enemy soldiers, and the Nazi artillery conducted methodical fire on the left bank in the area of the planned crossing of the regiment. All of us were burning with the desire to reach the right bank of the Dnieper as quickly as possible, to finally throw the enemy away from it. The command of the 5th Guards Army decided to force the Dnieper on the night of October 3rd. The 97th and 13th Guards Rifle Divisions were to go in the first echelon of the corps. Our regiment acted in the first echelon of the division. We, of course, understood that forcing such a river as the Dnieper is a very risky business, but an order is an order, it must be carried out. The 1st north of Vlesovka on the night of October 3rd crossed the Dnieper on fishing boats and rafts automatons of our regiment, led by Guards Senior Lieutenant M.F. Malikov. But the main forces of the regiment in that dark night could not reach the right bank. Under frantic enemy fire they, having overcome the deep navigable channel of the Dnieper, reached only a slightly overgrown shrubbery, unnamed island with the mark of 65.5, separated from the right bank of the river, almost overcome by a ford channel. Looking ahead, I will say that this island, when the soldiers looked around it, turned out to be similar in its configuration to an army helmet, and that's why in the battle reports for him so, and kept the name the island Kursk. But not only regiments of our division could not force the Dnieper that night. On the front of the whole army could not capture a single bridgehead on the right bank, and only on several islets to the north of Kremenchug Soviet fighters gained a foothold. The reasons for the failure of the 5th Guards Army at the first forcing of the Dnieper explained in his memoirs its former commander, Army General A. S. Shadov. Sadov. First of all, I want to emphasize. He writes that the army compounds went to the Dnieper with a large shortage of men and military equipment. The army lacked ammunition. Communications were severely stretched. In fact, by this time the troops had passed with fights from Belgorod more than 300 kilometers. Broken dirt, highway and railroad roads and blown-up bridges were still being restored, which made it difficult to bring material. Finally, we must admit that we underestimated the enemy's defense on the western bank of the Dnieper, believing that we still managed to knock him out of the occupied positions and seize the bridgehead. I must say that at that time the retention of Kursk and other islands seemed to me and other officers of the regiment in tactical terms an unjustified measure. Our losses were too great. But we did not know that the 5th Guards Army was assigned the task to divert as many enemy forces as possible to ensure the forcing of the Dnieper by other armies in the main directions. So we fulfilled this task. At a high price, but we fulfilled it. On October 3rd, the regiment's units managed to advance 400 meters deep into the island. Do not be surprised at such a modest pace of the offensive every step on the sandy soil, under the fire of the fiercely resisting enemy, holding the western part of the island, was given with difficulty. To help our fighters on the island were transferred units of other rifle regiments of the division. The day of October 4th was especially hard. 7 counterattacks were undertaken then by Hitlerites to knock out our fighters from the island. 7 times the barrage of shells and mines fell on them. From their explosions, clouds of sand rose into the air every now and then. The sand crunched on their teeth, clogged their ears, got into their eyes. And most importantly, it quickly rendered small arms inoperable rifles, automatic rifles and machine guns. They had to be cleaned often, for which they had to be completely disassembled and reassembled. Hitlerites on the island were in a better position. They were supported from the right bank by artillerymen and mortars who shot every scrap of land on the island. And what did we have? 4 Sorokopiatkas and 8 82M mortars, that's all we managed to get to Kursk under enemy fire. From the left bank of the Dnieper our artillerymen also fired at the island, but it was not very effective. In any case, we saw much less sand fountains on the enemy positions than on our own. Now I remember these hard days and nights of fighting on the nameless Dnieper island, and I see, as if in reality the guardsmen of the same command, then going into the attack on sandy embankments, pulling their legs out of them with difficulty, with rifles and automatic rifles in hand, then repulsing enemy counterattacks in hand-to-hand combat, then huddled in shallow sandy hollows, which with a great stretch could be called trenches, under enemy artillery and mortar fire. I was ordered to remain on the left bank and direct the forcing of the river by other units of the regiment, and to support with fire those who were on the Kursk. The regimental headquarters was located on a small hill, overgrown with sparse vineyards, just a few dozen meters from the bank of the Dnieper. Through binoculars I could clearly see how soldiers, sergeants and officers fought with the enemy on the island. But I learned the details of these fights later, when people returned to the left bank. On October 4th, when Hitlerites during the 3rd counterattack for the day bypassed the position of one of the rifle companies from the flank and began to move to the rear, a group of fighters from the reserve of the regiment commander led by Guards Captain Igorov, rushed to the rescue. Ahead of the officer, rushed out of the trench guards Private Ivan Semenev. I knew this soldier from the communications company. Stavropol collective farmer passed with the regiment all the way from near Rostov-on-Don, through the heat of Stalingrad and the Kursk Bulge. Just a few days ago, on the approach to the Dnieper, the regimental party organization accepted Ivan Simonov as a candidate for membership in the party. Brothers Slavs, he shouted loudly. Forward to the enemy, hurrah! Guardsmen rushed after him. In a hot hand-to-hand fight they killed more than 24 Hitlerites, and the rest turned back. In this battle Ivan Semyonov laid down his head, and never had time to get a card of a candidate for membership in the All-Union Communist Party. Next to Semenov bravely fought a machine gunner of the Guards, Private Avtandil Toidzis. He meticulously smashed the enemies, and when he ran out of ammunition, he used the butt of his automatic rifle. The guy from Georgia was wounded that day and together with other soldiers was sent by boat to the left bank of the Dnieper. But he did not stay there, but having bandaged his wound, returned to the island. However, he did not go to the attacks anymore, but 5 times he ferried the wounded across the Dnieper under the enemy fire. Guards Private Leonid Kryukov was firing from a hand machine gun at the attacking Germans and forced them to lie down. But at that moment a fragment of an enemy mine damaged the machine gun. Hitlerites again went and attacked. The young Komsomolets soldier fought them off with grenades. In the reflection of the 7th, and the last that day enemy counterattack had to participate, and the regiment commander, and all who were near him at the command and observation post. It was getting towards evening, and we already thought that the enemy, who had suffered considerable losses in fruitless counterattacks, would calm down at least until the next morning. But no. Again began artillery and mortar fire, again clouds of sand rose into the air and slowly settled, covering the trenches and trenches. And then Hitlerites knocked out our companies from the first trench and started fighting on the second. The situation became critical. The regiment commander, Guards Lieutenant Colonel P.R. Pansky ordered the Assistant Chief of Staff, Guards Captains Belousov and Igorov to gather everyone who was at the KNP and who was able to hold a weapon. Gathered about 30 people, more than a third of them officers. The battle was literally 2 or 3 dozen meters away, and it took them only 2 or 3 minutes to overcome this distance. They took advantage of the fact that the enemy could not at these moments to conduct artillery and mortar fire, for fear of hitting their own, and therefore approached the enemy for hand-to-hand combat, without losing a single man. But when, having pushed back the Germans behind the first trench, they went back, they were missing more than 10 men in the group. In the next 3 days Hitlerites also did not give us rest. Apparently they were ordered to throw the Soviet fighters from the island into the Dnieper at any cost. I will not describe these hot fights. I will only say that the Guards fought bravely, held firm, heroic. In these days distinguished themselves officers Communists White, Chmelevsky, Berezovoy, Mitin, Struzman, Ziborov, Petty Officer Suromyatnikov, Senior Sergeant Garusov, Sergeants Ipatov, Ivanov, Private Savin, Karpov, Shodin, Filimonov, Krysin, Medvedev. How can one count them all? Komsomol girl Anya Plekhanova, a sanitary instructor, can be rightfully called a heroine of the battles at Kursk. She carried dozens of wounded from the battlefield, was wounded twice, but did not leave the island, although she was offered to do so. In these days I lost my battle friends Guards Captains Belousov, Igorov and Regiment Agitator Guards Captain Klayev, with whom I fought side by side in Stalingrad and on the Kursk Bulge. Especially bitter for us was the death of the regiment commander Lieutenant Colonel Peter Romanovich Pansky, who led at a critical moment of the battle on October 6th, one of the counterattacks of our fighters, and was hit by a machine gun burst of Hitlerites. On October 7th, by order of the command, our units left Kursk Island and returned to the left bank of the Dnieper. Here the soldiers saw the number of our division paper Heroic Campaign for October 5th. Its entire first page, entitled Island of Heroes, was dedicated to the guardsmen who fought bravely on Kursk. With a heavy heart I went on a call to the division headquarters, I once again rethinking everything that happened on the island. Only after the war it became known to me that, according to the plan of the Front Command, our army was forced to conduct these heavy, bloody battles with Hitler's occupants in the area of Kremenchug to distract the enemy from the large operation to capture bridgeheads on the right bank of the Dnieper, much lower downstream, in the area of Mishur-in-Horn. Instead of Lieutenant Colonel Pansky, who died, I was appointed commander of the regiment, and Guards Captain Vasily Vasilievich Takmovtsev became chief of staff. I can't hide, in my soul I felt a sense of pride. It was a joke to become a regiment commander at the age of 24. And although at the front youth did not serve as an obstacle for appointment to higher positions, it was pleasant that the command gave me such confidence. And immediately there was a desire to do everything to justify it. There was only one way to justify it: to fight even better, to beat the enemy even harder. I remember that there was not even a thought that I would fail. First of all, by that time I was no longer a novice in combat. More than 2 years of war had given me experience, hardening and readiness to take responsibility. And in the most difficult days of the Battle of Stalingrad I had to temporarily command a regiment. Secondly, the ego of youth did not let me retreat. What do you mean I can't cope? I must cope. There were no other thoughts. At the front, not only the issue of appointment to a post is quickly resolved, there quickly passes and the process of entering it. And since I had already had to replace the regiment commander many times in difficult combat days, I got used to the new staff duties without much difficulty. On the night of October 9th, 1943, the regiment made a transition along the route Maximovka, near Dogorka, Peschanaya, Belaya Kotovka, Kristinovichi, and by morning concentrated near the farm Pleskochinka. A day later, having made a new march, we arrived at the place of dislocation in the area of Stoksovka on the left bank of the Dnieper. By this time, the Soviet troops had already forced the Dnieper in a number of areas and created significant bridgeheads on the right bank of the river. Pontoon and ferry crossings were built on the Dnieper. The 5th Guards Army, after almost 100-kilometer march downstream, began crossing the Dnieper a little north of Mishur-in-Rog and occupied positions on the right bank of the river in the area of Durievka, Kutsivalovka. Our division took over the strip from the 110th Guards Division, commanded by Guards Colonel M.I. Ogorodov. 289th Guards Rifle Regiment in full strength, including the task force of artillery, crossed overnight on the right bank of the Dnieper and at 3.00 on October 14th concentrated 1 kilometer southwest of Lyman. Together with other regiments of our division, we participated in the battles to expand the bridgehead in the area of Durievka and Kutsivalovka. Before the attack on the village of Kutsivalovka, a group of 7 men were given the task to sneak into the fascists' rear at night and to identify the location of firing points. By morning the scouts had to return. But in the morning only one man came to the regiment. It turned out that the scouts, having engaged in a battle, captured 3 houses and did not leave from there. They only sent a liaison to report the results of the reconnaissance. I ordered to raise the 1st Battalion in the attack, and the Nazis were knocked out of most of the village. In this battle bravely fought Komsomolets Private Ivan Yartsev. Soon the party organization accepted him into its ranks. Later Ivan Yartsev was wounded, was cured and returned to his native unit. In mid-October 1943, after a powerful artillery preparation, divisions of the 1st Echelon of the 32nd and 33rd Guards Rifle Corps launched an attack on the front line of German defences. Fierce fighting broke out. It was possible to cut in only 1.52 kilometres, but to break through the enemy defence line to the full depth, despite great efforts, our troops could not. The situation threatened to adversely affect the development of the entire front operation. Urgent measures were required to rectify the situation and ensure the fulfilment of the overall combat task, and they were soon taken. At night, the army compound struck an unexpected blow to the enemy and broke through his defence. The successes could have been more significant, if it were not for the bad weather. The autumn sky was covered with heavy lead-grey clouds, almost continuously pouring torrential rain. The rains washed out the front roads, and the soil, saturated with moisture, swelled. It was incredibly difficult to move in such conditions. People were quickly tired. It was like that everywhere, in all divisions and regiments. But despite the sloughing, incessant resistance of the enemy, we persistently moved forward, trying to halt the advance of the 5th Guards Army. The German Fascist Command transferred the 6th Tank Division and 376th Infantry Division to help the worn-out units. The Germans managed to slow down the advance of some units of the 5th Army, including the 97th Guards Rifle Division and our regiment. By October 20th, having fought over 60 kilometres, the regiment reached the foot of the height with 4 mounds. With the onset of darkness, all units of the regiment began preparations for the assault on the height. Its tactical advantage was highly appreciated by both us and the Nazis. No wonder that the enemy defended with fierce persistence, but he could not resist the onslaught of the Guards. In the course of the assault, special courage showed the commander of the platoon of Foot Reconnaissance Guards Staff Sergeant U.X. Hassanov. Under cover of his comrades' fire, he destroyed with grenades an enemy machine gun, which was hindering our advance, together with its crew. The report about his feat was the first to arrive at headquarters. Then I received more and more reports about the facts of heroism shown by the Guards that day. On October 30th, the regiment made the transition along the route Broitsko, Vladimirovka, Vilna. There we took the defence section from the 313th Guards Rifle Regiment of the 110th Guards Rifle Division. I was lucky enough to be a participant of the solemn event that took place on October 31st, 1943. On the scarlet velvet of the Guards banner of our division shone the Order of the Red Banner. In this exciting moment before my mind's eye passed its entire combat path from Rostov-on-Don to the Volga, and from there to the right bank of Ukraine. On the same day, there was a meeting of the party bureau of the regiment, which I attended. First, the applications for admission to the party were considered. The bureau recommended the party organization to accept the chief of the regiment's artillery armament, Guards Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Mikhailovich Kodenko, as a member of the All-Union Communist Party of Bolsheviks, and the senior mortar master, Guards Senior Sergeant Mikhail Selivestovich Shkorupa, as a candidate for membership in the party. I knew them both well, especially Nikolai Mikhailovich, with whom I had to communicate daily on duty to solve the issues of supplying the regiment with weapons, ammunition and military equipment. I would like to give him a more detailed characterization, not only because he headed a very important service for the regiment, but also because he was with me in the war for almost 3 years, and there were only 25 to 30 men left in the regiment by May of the 45th year. I knew that Kodenko, having graduated from high school in the city of Salsk, on the 3rd day after the beginning of the war at the age of 17 volunteered to join the Red Army and was enrolled as a cadet in the Tula Gunnery and Technical Artillery School. In the first days of October 1941, as part of the school, he took part in the battles against Guderian's tank hordes that broke through to Oral-Mentsensk. After 3 weeks of fighting, the cadets were recalled from the front and sent to Tomsk for additional training. In March 1942, as part of the 301st Krasnoyarsk Rifle Division, arrived at the front near Belgorod-Kharkov and in April-June took part in the battles in the Volchan direction. And in the first days of July, as I have already mentioned above, he began to serve in our regiment. Nikolai Mikhailovich, in the most difficult combat situation, did not lose his composure, was always internally collected and outwardly taut. But at the same time he was a very modest and even shy person. As the regiment commander, I could always rely on Kodenko and his subordinates. I knew that they would not fail. Barely settled in a new place, the regiment received a new combat mission to attack the enemy in the direction of Lozovatka, not allowing him to gain a foothold on the defensive lines. This was part of the preparation of a major offensive to expand the Krivoy Rog bridgehead, scheduled for mid-November by decision of the front commander, Army General I. S. Konev. In early November, the regiment concentrated in the area north of Maryevka, and the right flank came to the fork of the road Hutrish-Lozovatka. The tactically important height 159.4 was taken by storm. The enemy 3 times counterattacked our positions. Especially fierce was the 3rd counterattack, when the fascists threw on us 8 tanks, 2 armoured cars with a troop of infantry supported by artillery. Mortars of Guards Senior Lieutenant Lickman and fighters of rifle units opened on the infantry and tanks of the enemy accurate fire. 2 enemy vehicles were hit by the fire of anti-tank guns and mines. Guards Senior Sergeant Levin's unit, in which the gunner was Guards Private Kapustin, distinguished itself. The fire of the mortar battery was successfully adjusted from the observation point of Guards Senior Sergeant Patuk. The enemy counterattack was smothered. But, as luck would have it, the slopes of the heights became more and more densely enveloped by a heavy fog, and our artillerymen were deprived of the opportunity to fire at the Nazi tanks and infantry. The enemy managed to drive the soldiers out of the trenches. In a fierce fight, the company commander, Guards Lieutenant Matveev, was killed. By order of the division commander, the regiment withdrew to its former positions. The holiday of the Great October Revolution was approaching. I had an opportunity to make a present to the soldiers who had distinguished themselves in the battles for the height of 159.4. On them were drawn up submissions for government awards. In particular, the Order of the Red Star was presented to the commander of the machine gun platoon, Guards Junior Lieutenant I. Popomarev, who, being wounded, did not leave the platoon, petty officer of the 4th Rifle Company P.N. Simashko, who took command of the company when its commander was out of service, the commander of the machine gun guards Sergeant G.D. Vakulin, who destroyed the enemy firing point. Some time later, all these heroic soldiers were awarded orders.
On the eve of the October holiday, the personnel of the regiment experienced another pleasant event. All were given new winter uniforms. But even during the holidays, which were traditionally joyful for us, the frontal worries, alas, were not reduced. According to our intelligence, the enemy continued to strengthen their positions, made earthworks, mined, erected wire barriers. The Germans also noticeably increased the number of firing points. In each unit, our soldiers and commanders were warned that the enemy had set up sniper nests on the front line, and from there they were systematically targeting our positions.
Despite all the difficulties of the front situation, the Guardsmen on the day of the 26th anniversary of the Great October Revolution felt festive. This was helped in no small measure by our divisional newspaper. In its pages on November 7th was published a reply letter from the citizens of Stavropol to the soldiers, commanders and political workers of the 97th Guards Rifle Division. The letter said, "With joy and inexpressible pride we learn more and more of your heroic feats. At Belgorod, at Poltava and at Kremenchug you have once again shown all-conquering Russian military valor, courage and heroism, have shown your fiery love for our great motherland and your burning hatred for the despicable German fascist rapists, murderers and robbers who brought so many disasters, so much suffering to our land."
The region is successfully restoring industry. Many enterprises, destroyed by German barbarians to the ground, have already been fully restored. Stavropol meat packing plant, Pyatigorsk, Georgievsky, Vorontsovo, Alexandrovsky state oil plants, almost all bakeries and flour milling enterprises of the region, Pyatigorsk motor repair plant and others, railroads have been fully restored, all schools, technical schools and institutes have been opened and are working normally. Collective and state farms, having harvested the crops, actively fulfill their first commandment to give bread and other agricultural products to the country and the Red Army. On the fields of the region, now selflessly sowing winter crops, the first hundreds of thousands of hectares are sown. We are firmly confident that this fall will lay a solid foundation for a high harvest of the next year. We wish you new glorious successes.
Such a letter could not help but excite fellow soldiers, and many of them, impressed by the message of their fellow countrymen, immediately sat down to write letters to their relatives and friends. They wrote that they would not shame the glory of the sons of their native land, they would beat the hated enemy even harder. A festive dinner was arranged in all units on November 7th. Staff Regimental Cook, Guards Private Vasily Alexeyevich Zakazin, fed us perfectly. He was already in his old age, and all of us, officers, sergeants and soldiers of the regiment's command, called him simply Uncle Vasya. The soldier never took offence at this. On the contrary, he seemed to be proud of this address to himself. "You, Uncle Vasya, have a special surname," the soldiers joked. "Wow, Zakazin, a purely professional surname." His culinary skills matched his surname, and on holidays he cooked restaurant dishes of the highest class. The holiday was over, but the war continued. New battles were ahead of us.